Hello everyone, welcome to Mind Brain Talks, the place where you find diverse and scientifically accurate information regarding psychology, psychotherapy, neuropsychology, neuroscience and research methods every single week. My name is Nº11. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist who's been working as a therapist, researcher and educator for the past few years. Here in Mind Brain Talks, I discuss and describe different topics from psychology to neuroscience, and I try to explain them the best as I can for you to understand a little bit more about it. All contents here are just for educational purposes, and it's not intended to diagnose any psychiatric condition or neurological disorder. So, without further delay, let's jump for today's content. So today, let's talk about reasoning and speed of processing. This domain typically is a domain that is very important in neuropsychology because it's the domain that we can see how individuals are processing the information. But first, let's see the manuals that I recommend to you today. The first is the Principles of Neuropsychology. The second is the Fundamentals of Human Neuropsychology. The third is the Neuropsychology Handbook. The fourth is the Handbook of Clinical Neuropsychology. It's the second edition. The fifth is the neuropsychological assessment, and the sixth is the clinical neuropsychology. So now let's take a brief look on reasoning and processing speed. Reasoning is associated with every major human achievement that encompasses art, engineering, mathematics, philosophy, culture, and so forth. Reasoning is also associated with the thought process and with problem solving, which is several abilities which are usually developed in human species. Processing speed is also extremely important in every cognitive process associated with reasoning, academic or job performance, and intellectual development. So now let's see specifically how we can define these two cognitive processes. So let's start with reasoning. Reasoning typically is associated to the act of thinking and involves using logic and intellect to produce a conclusion or a judgment about something. It's also associated with the abstraction and intelligence. Typically, we can describe deductive and inductive reasoning, and reasoning process may also be prone to fallacies, heuristics and cognitive distortion. Don't worry, in the future I will produce different videos focused specifically on these aspects of the reasoning process, okay? Processing speed is a cognitive ability required in every cognitive domain, because in every mental operation that we use in our daily life, because if we do not process quickly our mental contents, these mental contents, as we saw in the previous presentation about memory, these mental contents tend to be forgotten because they are not encoded, okay? So, processing speed is very important in the encoding process. Processing speed may also be described as the time it takes to a person to do a mental task. It may also be described as the time that an individual takes to understand and to react to a given information that was received, of course. So it may be also viewed as the time between receiving and responding to a given stimulus. Both reasoning and processing speed are very important in planning and organizing thoughts in daily life activities. They are also very important in problem solving, decision making, starting tasks, and in complex attentional processes which were described previously. Typically, reasoning and processing speed are associated with the frontal lobe. There are several aspects described as the higher order cognition that are typically associated with the frontal lobe. Some features or executive skills or higher order cognitive skills may be described as planning, mental organization, problem solving, decision making, personality traits or personality as a whole, abstraction, and judgment. So, reasoning is involved in all of these higher order cognitive traits, higher order cognitive functions, okay? So, now let's see the summary and key points. We saw that reasoning and processing speed is an essential human feature. Both are required to process mental contents. Both are also required to normal human functioning in everyday life. And we saw that reasoning is also associated with the frontal lobe. Well, it's all for today. Don't forget to see the video description regarding today's theme if you want to see the manuals and the books that I recommend to you. Also, if you like what I'm doing, please consider to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. You can use the comment section below to express your mind and to express your thoughts. Let me know what you think about all the things that you saw here. Welcome to Mind Brain Talks, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye! Hello everyone, welcome to Mind Brain Talks, the place where you find diverse and scientifically accurate information regarding psychology, psychotherapy, neuropsychology, neuroscience and research methods every single week. My name is Bruno Faustino. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist who's been working as a therapist, researcher and educator for the past few years. Here in Mind Brain Talks, I discuss and describe different topics from psychology to neuroscience, and I try to explain them the best as I can for you to understand a little bit more about it. All contents here are just for educational purposes and it's not intended to diagnose any psychiatric condition or neurological disorder. So, without further delay, let's jump for today's content. So today, let's talk about perceptual organization. Perceptual organization encompasses several processes that are very important when we need to make some perceptions about the world that we are living. But before we get further on this, first let's see the manuals that I recommend to you today. The first is the Principles of Neuropsychology. The second is the Fundamentals of Human Neuropsychology. The third is the Neuropsychology Handbook. The fourth is the Handbook of Clinical Neuropsychology. The fifth is the Neuropsychological Assessment. And the sixth is the Clinical Neuropsychology. So now let's take a brief look on perceptual organization. So, perceptual organization is a process or a set of processes that enables the human mind to interpret the sensorial clues that reach the cortex from the senses. It is a core aspect of the human mind because it allows humans to interpret and make sense of the environmental context where they perform. Perceptual organization was first studied by Gestalt psychologists, which were a group of psychologists who studied perception and developed several perceptual principles. The most well-known Gestalt psychologists were Kafka, Kohler, and Wertheimer. So, Gestalt psychologists developed several perceptual principles. Law of Prägnanz. The human brain has a tendency to perceive the objects in an environment as simple, stable, and as the best form as possible. Kafka, in 1935, was the psychologist who developed this principle. Figure-ground relationship. The human brain is able to perceive a figure in a meaningful manner in the background, with it being separate of the background. So this law means that we can look to a figure and we can perceive several objects in that figure without distorting it. Perceptual constancy. The human brain has the tendency to perceive objects as unchanging and stable in size and shape. Several examples may be given, such as stable in color, size, brightness. So, we tend to look to objects and we tend to see these objects with stable characteristics. Perceptual grouping. The human brain has a tendency to perceive objects and to group them based on several recognizable patterns. So we can look to several objects, but if these objects have the same color, we tend to group them together. For instance, we can group several circles based on yellow color or several crosses in red color. Okay? Law of closure. The human brain has the tendency to fill the gaps between several salient stimuli, as examples, several objects, in order to develop an integrated representation of the object. So, we tend to fill the gaps between the lines of the objects. We tend to fill the gaps between the phrases that we hear, and we tend to fill the gaps in the narratives that we hear. So we can see other Gestalt principles that can be applied to these rules. Principles of similarity, proximity, symmetry, connectedness, brightness, collinearity, and common shape. So Gestalt psychologists studied these principles and saw that human perception is ruled by these principles. Also, there are several factors that can affect our perceptual organization, our perceptual learning, our perception of space, our mental state, our motivations and needs, and finally our cognitive styles. In the future, I will produce several videos focused specifically on these factors that can affect our perception, okay? But I will leave that for future videos. So, and when we look to the brain, we can see that our perceptual organization rely on several brain structures: parietal cortex, occipital cortex, temporal cortex, and frontal cortex, and associated subcortical structures such as the thalamus and the amygdala. So, other subcortical structures are also very important in perceptual organization, okay? So, take this in mind. So now let's look to the summary and key points. So, perceptual organization is a process or a set of processes that enables the human mind to interpret and to make sense of stimuli. Gestalt psychologists discovered several rules and principles that tend to guide our perception. There are several factors that affect our perceptual organization, and we saw that our perceptual skills depends on several brain structures. So, perceptual organization is a very complex theme in cognitive psychology and in neuropsychology. These are just the major aspects of our perception. In the future, I will produce different videos focused specifically on each point of our perception. Well, it's all for today. Don't forget to see the video description regarding today's theme if you want to see the manuals and the books that I recommend to you. Also, if you like what I'm doing, please like, share and subscribe this video to support the channel. Also, you can leave a comment in the comment section below to express your mind and to express your thoughts. Welcome to Mind Brain Talks, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!